This video presents some history trivia from the early issues of the Minneapolis Tribune. How much do you know about Minneapolis? For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the lay of the land, Minneapolis is located in southeastern Minnesota. In 1870, its population was about 13,000. This is an 1867 bird's eye view of Minneapolis, drawn by hand. It is very well done and shows the primary features of the city. The Mississippi River flowed through the middle of town, and St. Anthony Falls was the impetus for its growth. Minneapolis was on the west side of the river, and St. Anthony was on the east. The famous Mill District was located along the falls in Minneapolis. Two of the early bridges across the Mississippi were built through Nicollet Island, one of which was the Minneapolis Suspension Bridge. The Minneapolis Tribune was one of the early newspapers, and around 1870, it contained fun facts and stories in its local news section. That is where this trivia comes from. Alright, let's get into the stories. Some rascals sawed down about a half a mile of telegraph poles along the railroad line between Westcott and Rosemount. A $25 reward has been offered for anyone found stripping the bark from trees on Nicollet Island. This practice has become prevalent among mischievous boys. A flock of quails have been regular visitors to a wheat stack in Maple Grove. Quails were first introduced in Minnesota by General Sibley and Franklin Steele in 1845. Yesterday morning at 8:30 o'clock, a man discovered a deer crossing the river on the logs. Out of curiosity, we visited the long tunnels dug underneath the northern portion of Nicollet Island by John Orth, the brewer. The tunnels are 280 feet long and hold hundreds of kegs of beer. Agents in Minneapolis and St. Anthony are buying all the bones that can be found, paying $8 per ton. Bone dust was used extensively as a fertilizer. During the past year, one wood manufacturing firm at St. Anthony Falls produced 10,000 dozen pails, 3,000 dozen tubs, 300 dozen churns, and 500 dozen horse pails. Dealers are now busy cutting ice on the river and packing it into ice houses for summer use. These chunks were at least 2 feet in thickness. The cigar trade of Minneapolis is becoming quite a large business. 6 manufacturing firms in the city supply the trade in all parts of the state. The present muddy conditions of the streets reminds everyone of the need for good street crossings. People crossing the streets have sunk into the mud up to their ankles. The city engineer painted up some 300 signboards of the various street names. These signs will be put on every street corner to help people navigate through the city. 1 cent is a high price to pay for the privilege of crossing the suspension bridge over the Mississippi River to St. Anthony. Lake Minnetonka is alive with pickerel, which can be obtained in any quantity by shooting, spearing, or even throwing a pitchfork at them. 7 cows broke into a garden and ate everything in it. Cows are a great nuisance and make the streets look like barnyards. It is also unsafe for people to drive through the streets at night. The Liberty Pole that was put up in the Bridge Street Square in 1860 had to be cut down. It was damaged by a tornado in June 1866. Lightning struck the telegraph line near Warner's Block, causing the instruments to blow up with a loud bang. The operator, sitting at the table, escaped injury. A large prairie fire moved toward Fort Snelling, endangering the entire complex. All the soldiers were mustered for a fierce battle against the encroaching fire. They succeeded in stopping the blaze about 1.5 miles away from the fort. Another fire destroyed the commissary house at the fort and all the guns in the roundhouse. The cause of the fire was a defective stovepipe. 2 wagon loads of blueberries appeared at Bridge Square yesterday. The berries looked fresh and juicy and were sold in baskets made of birch bark. Not less than 216,000 pounds of maple sugar was made in Hennepin County in the spring of 1868. A milestone event occurred in Hennepin County in the summer of 1871. A load of locally grown apples was brought into market. The new courthouse at Stillwater obtained their fancy cut stone fronts from the Minneapolis quarries. A large force of stonecutters was employed there. Mr. Seidel erected a fancy brick house at the corner of Nicollet and 5th Streets. The brick came from the local Minneapolis brickyards, which produced a beautiful cream-colored brick. The habit of leaving burning piles of garbage in backyards was considered extremely dangerous. Minneapolis had an ordinance which prohibited bathing in the Mississippi River within the city limits. However, that law was not always followed around the mills and elsewhere. Another law prohibited lighting off fireworks within the city limits. Juveniles were instructed to avoid that irresistible desire. In the spring, manure piles and other filth were dumped into the Mississippi River. It was thought to be dangerous to do this, since drinking water and ice were obtained from the river. The University of Minnesota school year lasted from mid-September to the end of March. Tuition was free, and board could be obtained at $4 per week. In grading for a new sidewalk at the corner of 1st and Bridge Streets, workmen discovered a survey stake set in 1854, when the first town survey was made. A buffalo skull was plowed up in the garden of one of the citizens. The last buffalo seen within a day's journey of St. Anthony Falls was at Glencoe in August 1860. Charles Zimmerman, a local photographer, had a terrible accident at Minnehaha Falls. A large icicle, weighing several hundred pounds, fell, striking him on the head and knocking him out. Luckily, he was not badly hurt and didn't fall into the water below. Lake Minnetonka will do a large business this year. The beautiful lake scenery can be seen from the deck of steamboats. For several days, we have noticed a large number of young skaters on the thin river ice above St. Anthony Falls. A single slip, misstep, or thin spot would result in sure death. A man making maple syrup near Anoka crossed the river with several pails of syrup. He broke through the ice. Luckily, several men heard his cries and rescued him. So many runaways occur in this city that heavy posts should be put up to prevent the hydrants from being broken. A serious accident occurred on the suspension bridge. 2 women were crossing in a carriage when their horse became spooked by the whistle from a passing train. Both women were ejected backwards out of the carriage. The high school hall was packed last evening for a performance, when the floor cracked and fell half an inch. There was considerable alarm for a few moments, and many people left. Last evening, an employee from the local ice cream shop invaded the newspaper office with a load of ice cream, lemonade, and cake. It was a splendid treat, and the office was greatly pleased. Mr. Washburn presented each of his employees with a fine turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. The noon whistle at the Pacific Mill did not go off yesterday, as the boilers were undergoing maintenance. Many late dinners were served. A town clock would be a great public convenience. I hope you enjoyed those bits of trivia about Minneapolis. Check out my other YouTube videos and my website at mnbricks.com.